everyone. Hi, we are live on YouTube now. This is the introductory session of the Kerala Assistant Professor course. Kerala Assistant Professor exam notification will come soon, we hear. So we are starting the classes with the old syllabus. And in case there is a new syllabus later, you don't have to worry, we will deal with that also. Now, according to the old pattern of the exam, it was descriptive type exam. We had 4-mark questions, 6-mark questions, 5-mark questions, etc. So we will start with writing practice also as we study. It is extremely important to write very well. You have to learn to pack points into your sentences. You have to learn to quickly give a structure to your answer without wasting time. Even as you think, you have to think in terms of introduction, the body of the answer, and then you have to think in terms of the conclusion. So it is with writing practice that we can do it. Even though you have a big syllabus, possibilities are that there won't be questions from many of these works. There won't be questions, will not, questions ഉണ്ടാവില്ല. So you have to study the entire syllabus, but what is more important is to learn to write fast. When you study, you have to write and study. You have to write answers, if possible, every day. A 4 or 5-mark answer will take only 10 minutes or maybe less. So you cannot avoid doing it. Those who write more will get high ranks. Practice is what makes you perfect. So, from the beginning, we have to learn to write. Okay, another thing I want to tell you is, even though there are lots of literature portions prescribed for you, the number of questions from literature will be kind of equal to the number of questions from linguistics, ELT, criticism, theory, culture studies. So those areas are super important. Criticism and theory, culture studies classes for you will begin next month itself. Okay? And we have to start writing answers. ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ മാത്രം പഠിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കേണ്ട. ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ മാത്രം പഠിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരുന്നാൽ അത്രയും ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് അതിൽ നിന്ന് വരില്ല. ഇഫ് യു ജസ്റ്റ് കീപ് സ്റ്റഡിങ് ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ മോർ ആൻഡ് മോർ ആൻഡ് മോർ, there won't be that many questions from literature. So don't think that we should have the same attitude that we have for HSST. For HSST, we need to be prepared for MCQs from any part of the literary works. പക്ഷെ റൈറ്റിംഗ് ആവുമ്പോൾ they will ask about education, they'll ask about linguistics and theory a lot more. ഇപ്പോൾ അരമണിക്കൂർ മുമ്പ്, half an hour ago, I was doing KEA PU lecturer exam. അതിൻ്റെ ഓറിയന്റേഷൻ, വേർ ദർ ഇസ് ഓൺലി ലിറ്ററേച്ചർ മാത്രമേ ഉള്ളൂ അധികമായിട്ടും. പക്ഷേ യു പീപ്പിൾ ഹാവ് ടു സ്റ്റഡി not only literature but linguistics and ELT, criticism and theory. So നമുക്ക് അതും കൂടി നമുക്ക് നോക്കണം. As you all know, I am going to give you an overview of criticism and theory and culture studies to start with. You all know that criticism emerged from philosophy. Philosophy was preoccupied in the Greco-Roman period with understanding what is this life, where are we come from, what is this world made up of, what is right and wrong. And they understood drama to be a representation of the life we live. The earliest of the critics that we have to study is Aristotle. Aristotle wrote Poetics, as you know, and Poetics is a text that lays down for the first time, the principles on which literature is based. What are the important features of criticism? That is what Aristotle lays down here, the basic principles of what is literature, right? And criticism is always based on the text itself. How is the text written? What is the genre in which the text is written? What is the language? What are the literary devices that are used in the text? All these were very important considerations in the Greek and Roman classical period. The golden age of ancient literature it was. It was a time of artistic and political and cultural flowering. So, elements of that can be seen in the critical works of this period also. For example, they all upheld what is good in culture. They all upheld rational thought. They all upheld orders and structure. They understood the ideal or the epitome of goodness. In Aristotle's Poetics, we see for the first time a discussion of poetry and drama. He talks about tragedy primarily. Even though he does mention comedy, he does not go into discussion of comedy. He is primarily talks about tragedy. He defines tragedy. He talks about the constituent elements of tragedy. He talks about the tragic hero. He talks about the features of tragedy. He talks about metaphor. Because it is all related to life itself. Tragedy is like a mirror held to life. Today we have so many ways of understanding life, but in Aristotle's time, not so much. And in Aristotle's Poetics, he talks about the classical rules of the three unities. We all know that it is from Plato that he got the idea of mimesis, imitation. Tragedy is the imitation of real life action. Aristotle also talks about the importance of catharsis in tragedy, how to purge yourself, how to get rid of excess emotions. He also talks about organic unity. Tragedy should have an organic unity like an organism. He talked about the importance of probability and necessity in characterization. The key to successful preparation for a descriptive exam is to study in the form of keywords. Studying MCQs also can help you in a descriptive exam because MCQs will give you points, keywords. If you string together the keywords, you will get good answers. In the exam hall, you don't have time to think a lot. You need maximum time to write, no thinking. The moment you see the question, you should be able to structure the answer in your head and start writing. So you have to practice writing like that and then edit your answer and study everything in the form of keywords. Aristotle's ideas are represented in Sidney's works also. Philip Sidney was a Renaissance critic and he was a classicist and a moralist. And Philip Sidney wrote Apology for Poetry or Defense of Poesy. In your syllabus, Sidney's spelling is given wrongly. Apology for Poetry or Defense of Poesy is the only important literary critical work of Sidney. Sidney, if you know, was a Renaissance intellectual, Renaissance chivalric humanist, a fully rounded Renaissance man. He was multi-talented. He was a great soldier. He was a poet. And he did great diplomacy, statesmanship he had. And he was well liked everywhere. Edmund Spencer dedicated his Shepherd's Calendar to Sidney. Remember, everybody, when you write a descriptive exam, you should show that you know the background, the sociopolitical background. You should show that you know the biography of the author. You should show that you know point by point the main ideas of the text. You should show that you know, you have read the text. You may be, you should be able to quote a few lines from the text. And you should also look at who are the people who are influenced by this text. How did this text get interpreted later? Is there any adaptation? Mention years. All that should be there in every answer. There should be no reason for the examiner to reduce your marks. The examiner should be forced to give you marks. And don't make spelling and grammar mistakes, because the examiner will look at the answer. Okay, many points are there, but spelling and grammar wrong. He might reduce 1 mark or even more. If he's a grammar freak, he will reduce more. He or she will reduce more. So grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes are very bad. You have to work on that. Okay, you have to start using language the correct way. Remember, Sidney wrote Apology for Poetry against Stephen Gossen's School of Abuse. And Sidney was following majorly Aristotle's ideas. Aristotle's ideas as well as some ideas of Plato. Sidney defined poetry famously as a speaking picture with its end to teach and delight. Remember, in the syllabus, from Philip Sidney, without touching Dryden, they are jumping to Coleridge. Biographia Literaria, published in 1817. Chapter number 14. Chapter number 13 is where he talks about imagination. And then in chapter number 14, he talks about very major points about poetry. He defines a poem. He defines willing suspension of disbelief. Willing suspension of disbelief means you should be able to understand the limitations of the medium, because that constitutes poetic faith. And then he talks about the 2 cardinal points of poetry. Both of these are Wordsworth and Coleridge shared in their writing. One is the supernatural, the other is the natural. You know, the poet should focus on the supernatural as well as the natural. Poetry of Coleridge is different from poetry of Wordsworth. He also distinguishes between a poem and poetry. So before the classes begin, which is now, today we are beginning, even before that, you should go through the major parts of the text. You should go through the salient aspects of the text. A student should never sit in class without knowing the text. A student should be like a scholar who already knows the text. Only then whatever the teacher is teaching will make sense. You will remember, you'll be able to think, you'll be able to interact and ask questions. That will lead to great descriptive writing. Every day before you go to bed, please read some of the original primary texts. Now from Samuel Coleridge's Biographia Literaria, we are jumping to Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own is a very major text of modernism published in about 1929. This is based on lectures that she gave at Girton College and Newnham College. She gave lectures at Girton College and Newnham College in Cambridge. And here she is trying to go to a college or a library to read up, and she finds that women are not even given entrance. There is a lot of discrimination shown to women. So she goes for lunch and she pays with the money that an aunt had given her. And she says, what a woman needs is financial independence and some space of her own. Women in the 17th, 18th, the 19th centuries were not writing a lot. Only women who had money, who had the means at home, only they were able to write. Dear friends, Virginia Woolf says, if Shakespeare had a sister, Judith, what would happen to her? She would go to London, get raped by somebody. She would not be Shakespeare. So when you study, you should read the text. You should understand and underline the excerpts from the text. That is very important. You should be able to quote from the text. She also talks about an androgynous mind. Just being a woman, 100% full-time, 24/7 is not enough. Great minds are gender neutral. Today we talk about gender neutrality. Our Virginia Woolf already talked about it in 1929. After Virginia Woolf, there is another modernist writer that we have to study, that is T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot's Tradition and the Individual Talent is a very important essay published in 1919, that is 10 years before A Room of One's Own. Here he defines tradition and what he calls historical sense and talks about impersonality that is required of a poet. The poet argues that, the author argues that alone an individual talent does not have meaning. The value of an individual writer comes from his relationship with tradition. The value of an individual writer comes from his relationship with tradition. The poet's originality lies in his ability to engage with tradition. Tradition is not something that is dead and gone. Tradition is something that is living in us. We have to understand not only the pastness of the past, but also its presence. That is what T.S. Eliot says. Not only the pastness of the past, but also its presence. Now, when T.S. Eliot was writing, there was already Ferdinand de Saussure and the coming of structuralism. Ferdinand de Saussure's ideas like the basics of structuralism. Related to structuralism, there was archetypal or myth criticism. It is only in 1957 that archetypes became a very important thing in literature. Before that, Carl Jung had talked about archetypes, but that is in psychology. Archetype for Carl Jung is the model of a character. Archetype in the context of Northrop Frye are the foundational conventional myths that act as metaphors in literature. The underlying patterns, the mythical patterns of literature. Literature is about recurring patterns. These recurring patterns can be characters, symbols, actions, and all these are rooted in ancient myths. For example, the creation myth, the quest motive or quest myth, the deluge, light, fire, water, seasons. These are all looked upon as symbols or archetypes. He compares spring to comedy, summer to romance, then autumn to tragedy, and winter to irony or satire. In every text, there will be elements related to the seasons and related to birth or death or growth or adventure. All these can be related to one another to make meaningful structures and patterns. Archetypal criticism can be inductive or deductive, identifying universal truths by studying specific elements. That is called inductive, from the particular to the general. You can also do from the general to the particular. All this Northrop Frye has done in Anatomy of Criticism. You have to study in Kerala assistant professor exam. Northrop Frye's Archetypes in Literature. Am I boring you, everyone? Are you loving this? In the early 20th century, there is also practical criticism of I.A. Richards, William Emerson, and F.R. Lewis. And we also have the new critics of America. Cleon Brooks is a new critic. Cleon Brooks's language of paradox is important. Cleon Brooks wrote the book, The Well-Wrought Urn. Cleon Brooks's book is The Well-Wrought Urn, which took its title from John Donne, as you know, the canonization. In The Well-Wrought Urn, in the section called Language of Paradox, Cleon Brooks is arguing that paradox is the essential, foundational, inherent element of poetry. Paradox is not just a figure of speech that is used for decoration, but paradox and irony are the means by which contradictory and complex experiences are unified in a logical and scientific manner. So he wrote both about irony and paradox. Cleon Brooks also talked about John Donne and the canonization, William Wordsworth's poems, It's a Beauteous Evening, Calm and Free, etc., in the context of paradox. Then there is Edmund Wilson, who wrote Marxism and Literature. Edmund Wilson was again an early 20th century writer who wrote the Triple Thinkers. This essay is from the Triple Thinkers, published in. He examines the relationship between Marxism and literature in this essay. What is the relationship between Marxism and literary production? He argues that while art, all Marxists gave importance to social and political and economic conditions, right? He argues that while art is certainly influenced by social, political, and economic conditions, it should not be reduced to propaganda. Marxist ideas should not be rigidly applied. He critiqued the extreme employment of Marxist ideals. And he's argued that Marx and Engels never wanted it to be rigid. So he is quoting from many writers and he's referring to Lenin and Trotsky, Stalinism, etc. And this essay is also included in your syllabus. Next, we have a woman writer, a feminist, Elaine Showalter. Elaine Showalter, everybody knows for Towards a Feminist Poetics, where she talked about gynocriticism. What is prescribed for you is feminist criticism in the wilderness. Feminist criticism in the wilderness, like the other essay, talks about a female-centered approach, which is gynocriticism only. Gynocriticism is when we focus on women as writers rather than passive readers. Women as writers. They are not passive consumers of male-oriented texts. When women read male-oriented texts, male-constructed texts, that is called feminist critique. But now the focus is on gynocriticism, the themes and patterns of women's writing and the reception of women's writing. That is the next essay that you have to study. And then you have to study none other than Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida in the essay Difference talks about the meaning of difference. You all probably know that difference means difference plus deferment. It's a neologism made by Derrida. Language conveys meaning, gets meaning, not only by difference, but also by deferment or postponement. That means meaning is never fixed. Meaning is never permanent. Meaning is existing in a network of differences. Meaning is never fixed or permanent. Meaning is provisional, existing in a network of differences, always shifting, never complete. Related to difference is trace and play. The meaning is based on traces rather than absolute presence of meaning, traces of meaning. Where meaning is absent, there is also meaning there. Being is a construct. Difference is about the decentered meaning. Difference is about the non-origin of meaning. It is not there. It is not there, but it is there. That is how meaning is. That is how Derridian post-structuralism gave importance to free play, to plurality of meanings. Because he is talking about meaning in terms of difference. Now, Karl Marx's concept of commodity fetishism, the fetishism of commodities and the secret thereof. That is the other essay that we have to study. You know that Karl Marx talked about capitalism. Capitalism alienates you from your work. Capitalism alienates you from your fellow workers. Capitalism alienates you from yourself. You don't know what you want. In a capitalistic society, you are forced to conform. And Marx talked about a specific kind of alienation called reification. Reification is when you look at relationships as commodities. Reification is when you look at relationships as commodities. Commodity fetishism is a kind of reification. Okay? When you say that Dalits or certain minority communities, when you consider them as a vote bank, for example, there is reification there. You're not looking at the people, you're just looking at them as one entity. You're homogenizing them. When you look at India as a market, there is reification. When you look at, the wife as a cooking or cleaning machine, there is reification there. When you think that love can be expressed through gifts, when you think class can be expressed through clothing, all that is commodity fetishism. Fetishism of the commodities and the secret thereof. That is the essay that you have to study. Now, Karl Marx is a writer who wrote many other works. Karl Marx wrote The German Ideology, Communist Manifesto, Das Kapital. Remember, guys, you have to know the author, you have to know the context, and you have to know other concepts also. Even though commodity fetishism is what this essay title says, remember, it is related to reification, it is related to alienation. Reification is when social relationships are understood in terms of, they are appearing in terms of objects or goods. Right? And all this commodity fetishism relates to power, how power works in the society. The secret is that the value of the secret thereof, the title, the secret is that the value of a commodity does not lie in the object, but it lies in the social relationships. That is why a very ordinary cotton sari, which has very less value, becomes a very expensive cotton sari when it is posted in Instagram with certain digital media support. Many of the expensive saris that we buy are actually very, very easy to produce, very less pricey in production. But are the people who produced it getting all the money? Not necessarily. The people who are selling it are the powerful people who are, getting the profit. All right. Now, there is another important writer, Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud's concepts of conscious and the unconscious, the id and the ego, superego, beyond the pleasure principle, all these are prescribed for you. Even before we go into the classes, it would be good if you brush up all your knowledge, you revive all that you know about it, and based on the text that is prescribed for you, you should be able to write about it. You should be able to explain what is id, ego, and superego. You all know that id is the most repressed unconscious. Id is the unconscious mind, the instinctual core that is present inside us. The id is related to immediate gratification or pleasure principle. Isn't it? The superego is the conscience. It is the internalized moral and societal standards, what makes us acceptable in society, the understanding of morality. It is the conscience, it guides us. It is like the bad angel, superego is like the good angel. Balancing these two, in between these two, we have ego. Ego balances the id and the superego. Ego is the reality principle. Superego is the morality principle. Right? So these ideas you should be able to write in a very clear manner that is expected of you in the exam. You should be able to write a very good essay related to Frankfurt School. A second generation Frankfurt School member is there. That is Jürgen Habermas. Habermas wrote a famous essay, Modernity, an Unfinished Project. That is also prescribed for you. Modernity began with the Enlightenment. Modernity is related to the Enlightenment ideals of equality, democracy, rationalism. But all these ideals, even though they are great, when you talk about it, they did not liberate humanity completely. So Habermas talks about how these ideals should be corrected. Enlightenment is not a bad movement. Enlightenment had a lot of wonderful ideas and ideals that we can still use. He argues against postmodernism. Postmodernism rejected modernism and Enlightenment. But he argues against that and says that what we need is a communicative rationality. That's a very important term in Habermas. What we need is communicative rationality that balances rather than rejects. So Habermas is talking about how social interaction should be based on mutual understanding and language and practical aspects. This is called communicative action, not an ideal, bookish, pedantic knowledge, but practical action. That is what he advocates. Then we have a very important writer from cultural studies. He's the one who coined the term cultural materialism, and that is none other than Raymond Williams. Raymond Williams had a very strong notion of what is tradition. He wrote Tradition, Institution, and Formations. Raymond Williams, in this essay, Tradition, Institutions, and Formations, talk about the three concepts, tradition, institution, and formations, the three concepts or three branches of society by which we establish cultural hegemony in the society. Cultural hegemony is maintained in the society. Cultural hegemony is challenged also in the same way. Tradition or institution is not a static idea. It's not a static concept. It is dynamic. It is changing. And also he believed that tradition is selective. Tradition is dynamic. It is changing. It is selective. And there is a continuous dialogue between the past and the present. That is about Raymond Williams. In 1980, there was a movement that came into being under the aegis of Stephen Greenblatt. Later on, Stephen Greenblatt became a very major writer. He even won the Pulitzer Prize. Stephen Greenblatt established a new method of reading the canonical writers like Shakespeare. He wrote many works on Shakespeare and how to read Shakespeare in the context of the power structures which bring him into being. Shakespeare and the Exorcists is an essay by Stephen Greenblatt, by which he's not just talking about just exorcism, he's talking about the way in which power works. Talking about Shakespeare's King Lear and Samuel Harsnett, another writer, he's talking about here a declaration of egregious popish impostors. What is it? It's a non-fiction work. Always fiction and non-fiction were read together. Parallel reading happened in New Historicism. He shows how Shakespeare uses the language of demonic possession, in King Lear. So Jesuit exorcisms were happening, religious exorcisms were happening at that time, and how the theatricality of exorcism as an event was used to influence public consciousness. All these are social and cultural events that he is bringing in to understand Shakespeare in a new light, in order to understand how power works through Shakespeare. Then we have Michel Foucault. I'm just giving you an overview. All these will be discussed in great detail in the classes. There will be a panel of teachers who are experts in this area who will be teaching you. As you all know, we give you the most excellent classes and support in our paid course and even in our free courses. Here in Michel Foucault, you have to study about power and knowledge and also discourse. Power, knowledge, and discourse are inextricably connected. These concepts are inextricably connected. Power always works through discourse. Our education, examination, these are all discourses through which power is wielded. A discourse helps us or not helps us. A discourse imposes on us an understanding of what is true, what is acceptable. The discourse of the nation teaches us how you should think about the nation, what is right thought about the nation. The discourse of gender teaches us what is right and what is wrong. And power works through discourse, and it's everywhere. It is ubiquitous. That is what Foucault says. Then we have to study Edward Said's Introduction to Orientalism. You know that Edward Said is very important post-colonial critic, and his 1978 book, Orientalism, was a revolution in itself. He famously defines Orientalism as a corporate institution. And it is the Western way of looking at the Orient in order to manage the Orient, in order to dominate over the Orient. The Westerners represented the Orient in certain ways. That is what Said talks about. Said is deeply rooted in Foucauldian theory, and he shows how the Western power authorizes the knowledge of the Orient. However, needless to say, such an Orient that the Westerners constructed is not the real Orient. It is only a construction. Then, after Edward Said, we have Hélène Cixous, who wrote The Laugh of the Medusa. The Laugh of the Medusa is a 1978 essay. It came out in the year of visual pleasure and narrative cinema, which is also there for you to study. Laugh of the Medusa is where Hélène Cixous talks about écriture féminine or women's writing. As you all know, mainstream language is considered to be patriarchal. Écriture féminine is a new style of writing that should reflect what is feminine. So there is an essentialist element in Cixous' definition. Women, she says, should reflect the feminine through their writing. She is redefining Medusa. Remember, Laugh of the Medusa. She is redefining Medusa not as a terrifying demon or monster as she is presented in mythology, but a powerful figure, a laughing figure who is not afraid of the men. Later on, Hélène Cixous' definition of écriture féminine was revised by Julia Kristeva, and others, Lucy Irigaray and others. And Julia Kristeva brought in the ideas of Lacan, the symbolic and the semiotic, to make it less essentialist. Next, we have the 1990 work by Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick, Epistemology of the Closet. It is a pioneering work in queer theory, where she is questioning the heterosexual homosexual dichotomy that was rampant in the 19th century. So she is redefining human sexuality here. What is human sexuality? It lies beyond the binary opposition of man, woman, or homosexual and heterosexual. You can't just define sexuality as homosexual or heterosexual. So in this book, Sedgwick is looking at a number of literary works. She is referring to homosexuals like Herman Melville, then Oscar Wilde, Nietzsche, etc., to define her stance. So that is what we have in literary criticism module. Cultural studies is also there, 5 texts. I'm not going into that now though. I hope you enjoyed the little discussion that we had, people on YouTube. So YouTube babies, I am stopping the live streaming now. Thank you. Please join the Kerala Assistant Professor exam course at Vallath, because those who are going to pass this exam are all at Vallath. Okay. They are the best and they are studying really well, and we are going to support them 100%, 24/7. Thank